Hello friends, I hope you're all in a good mood because today we're going to look at some wonderful news. I've been reading some studies and some surveys and I've been looking at some data and some information, and it seems to me that we are headed towards quite a utopia. So what we're going to do is look at a bunch of stuff that I've been researching over the past few hours. When I sat down tonight, the plan was just to make a 2-minute promotional video for the most recent Late Night Truth Lounge. That's all this was meant to be. And then I thought I might just go and double check something about something I heard, which kind of came up during the Late Night Truth Lounge. And then that led to looking at something else. And that led to looking at something else. And before I knew it, 4 or 5 hours had passed and there were 36 tabs on my Firefox tab thing. This has happened to me a lot. And what I usually do is think to myself, okay, I'll record all of this information in my folders or in my files and I'll come back and do something tomorrow, and then that just never happens. So what I thought I would do today instead is just do a video and try to record it in a way that is also good for an audio, and then just publish it as it is. Even though there's lots of different topics covered, there's no real overarching conclusion to the whole thing. I'm not trying to make a point to you that you should believe one thing or another. There's too many different topics being covered. But I think that if you go through this process with me from start to finish, you're going to hear some things you haven't heard before. You're going to hear some things that you'll agree with. You'll probably hear some things you disagree with. If nothing else, hopefully you find this entertaining, thought-provoking, eye-opening. Let's just see what happens. And again, I am recording this in the sense of I know I'm going to release it as an MP3. So for those of you who are just listening rather than watching, there will be key information on the screen for the viewers, but I'll make sure I explain that to you so you won't miss anything too important if you're just listening to the MP3 version. Now you might be thinking, hold on JB, let me get this straight. You sat down 5 hours ago to record a 2-minute video and it's turned into, and that was just meant to be a promotional video for a podcast you did yesterday. And it turned into what's going to be a 1-hour presentation on a whole bunch of different topics, looking at scientific studies and papers and surveys on a range of different things. Is that what you're telling me, JLB?
That's true. That's right.
So without further ado, let's get on with the presentation. I started off with the image of a utopia, but let's get into the real stuff then. Here is a meme of a bunch of zombie humans looking at their phones. I first saw this one like 10 years ago. So even 10 years ago, people could see that as people, we were becoming addicted to our phones, to our screens. If only we knew then what we know today.
That's true.
Here's another thing that I saw maybe 10 years ago. And it's a couple of people, and they are zonked out on their social media, and they don't really seem to know what's going on around them.
That's true.
Here we've got the deliberate dumbing down of America. Herd mentality made easy. Kids zonked out on their Ritalin, drinking their Red Bulls.
That's right.
Here we have a young lady, and she is surrounded by the influence, shall we say, of social media.
That's a fair assessment, I think.
I first saw this one, again, almost 10 years ago. And this was before anybody had ever heard of a Bonnie Blue or these kinds of people. It is amazing how much things seem to have progressed in just the past few years.
Yeah, that's true.
I started off with the image of the utopia, but over the last minute or two, you might have got the impression that tonight's presentation might go into some very strange, maybe even some dark territory.
That's right.
Now, according to one survey that was done with a sample size of just a little over 1,000 people, they reckon that Gen Z are spending about 6 hours on their phones on average per day. Millennials like myself are apparently spending about 4.5 hours per day on our smartphones. The Gen Xers, apparently it's more like 4 hours per day. My question for you is, do you ever check your phone to see how much time you're spending on your phone? This is a serious question. Do you ever check on your phone how much time you're spending on it per day?
Are you seriously asking that question to me?
I'm not here to judge anybody. I am addicted to the internet just like anybody else.
That's right.
Now, the reason I got into looking at some things tonight that eventually became what's going to be tonight's presentation was that somebody left a post on the Conspiracy No Pulse subreddit talking about the difference between the anxiety and the fear and the spurging out of people on Reddit versus real life, where people don't seem to be anywhere near as worried about geopolitics.
It's not so far-fetched, I don't think.
In other words, if you go to Reddit, which is one of the most popular websites in the world today, according to a number of different sources, it appears as though a lot of people are really worried about the geopolitics, They're worried about the Orange Man bad. They're worried about what's happening with Gaza and Canada and Mexico. And what is this Orange Man doing? And are we headed towards some kind of world war? People are really worried apparently on Reddit.
Yeah, fine. So what?
But in real life, are people anywhere near as worried? I don't think they are. But I don't know. And this got me going into talking about how I have this suspicion that people's Reddit feeds and their Twitter feeds and their Instagram feeds already contain potentially AI-generated content for them specifically.
Okay, so what's your point?
So we've all heard about how the algorithms are trained to keep us engaged to our smartphones, giving us stuff that it knows we want to see. And a lot of people want to see stuff that makes them angry or makes them anxious or fearful or whatever. So we already know about the algorithms. And we already know about the bots. There are people using bots. They're using sock puppet accounts. They're using fake accounts to push certain agendas. We know about the algorithms. We know about the bots. But what I'm suggesting is that it might go a lot further than that. It might be that when you're scrolling through your social media feed, there are posts that are being created just for you that seem as though they're normal posts that other people are reading and accessing, and you're part of some broader conversation or transfer of ideas or information. But actually, that post or that tweet that you're reading, it was made a second ago for you, and once you scroll past it, it'll disappear again. I know that's a radical idea, but we're going to look at some stuff today, and I'm going to show you some of the reasons why I think this might already be happening, and if it isn't, it's only a matter of time until it does.
We can't get driven down crazy conspiracy rabbit holes.
Now, we did discuss this to some degree during the Late Night Truth Lounge last night, which turned into an almost 4-hour show because the audience apparently was quite enjoying the show.
That's right.
We did an epic trivia session that went on for a couple of hours, and it was hotly contested. And so what I did was I took that live stream and separated it into 2 separate files, each just under 2 hours long. I balanced the audio, I re-rendered it, uploaded it, and that's available for free. I'll put a link to that in the show notes below. I recommend you go and check it out.
Just fucking do it.
And so when I sat down 5 hours ago, that's what I was meant to be doing, just telling you about the Late Night Truth Lounge. That was it. But then I started looking at some things, and before I knew it, I'd been sitting here for 5 hours. And instead of just saving all the links and then telling myself I'll come back to this in the future, I thought, no, let's just record this. It won't be quite as rigidly structured as some of the material I put together, but there's bound to be some stuff in here that you haven't seen or heard before. In the last 5 hours, I saw some stuff that I hadn't seen before, even on topics that I've looked into before.
And what I saw scared me to the depths of my miserable soul.
And what I'm suggesting with our social media feeds is that we might not realize that it's not simply that the algorithms are giving us content that it knows we're going to engage with. And it's not just that there are bots out there trying to sway opinions or push agendas. What I'm going to suggest is that we might already be in echo chambers of one, which is to say that the problem isn't that there are computer science or computer engineers people typing up algorithms and getting more and more proficient at keeping us glued to the screen. It might not be just that. And it might not just be those bot farms with those, those images, those videos you've seen of people, for some reason it's usually in Asia, with all of these phones in front of them. That footage that we've all seen. It might not just be the algorithm designers and the bot farmers. There might be something else going on here. And I've got a little clip from some movie I've never seen called When a Stranger Calls. Take a listen to this.
Stop calling me, you
Listen
sick...
to me. We traced the call. It's coming from inside the house. You hear me? It's coming from inside the house. You need to get out of there right now.
What I'm going to suggest is that it isn't the external elements or actors or influences. You know the idea of an echo chamber, that there are all people repeating stuff to each other. What I'm suggesting is that some of us, without realizing it, might have gotten caught up in an echo chamber where the echo is our own voices. And as you'll see as we progress through this presentation, looking into one thing led to another, and before I knew it, I'd gotten onto tangential topics.
And what I saw scared me to the depths of my miserable soul.
Okay, just quickly, let's look at this article from The Guardian. Bots on X worse than ever, according to analysis of 1 million tweets during the first Republican primary debate. This is from September 2023. It says, bot activity on the platform formerly known as Twitter is worse than ever, according to researchers, despite X's new owner, Elon Musk, claiming a crackdown on bots as one of his key reasons for buying the company. Quote, "It is clear that X is not doing enough to moderate content and has no clear strategy for dealing with political disinformation," Associate Professor Dr. Timothy Graham tells Guardian Australia. A researcher at the Queensland University of Technology, Graham has tracked misinformation and bot activity on social media for several years, including until Musk took over Twitter in October last year. Graham and the PhD candidate Kate Fitzgerald recently analysed 1 million tweets surrounding the first Republican primary debate, along with Tucker Carlson's interview with the former US President Donald Trump, streamed on X at the same time. Okay, so I went and found their study. So I didn't just read the newspaper article. I was like, okay, they say they've analysed all of these tweets and they've found that there's this bot network trying to persuade people, change their opinions. Okay, I wanted to go and read the paper itself. So I found it and I read it. Pardon the pun. One of the things that stood out to me about halfway into their paper was this. Meanwhile, R-Politics, that is the subreddit for politics, the politics subreddit, is one of the largest subreddits with over 8 million subscribers. There are extensive subreddit rules, a large list of moderators, and automated moderation bots. It is possible that inauthentic activity was detected by automods and removed prior to collection. In summary, no coordinated activity was found on Reddit during the Republican primary debate or in discussion of the Tucker Carlson and Donald Trump interview. So this is a paper that was dedicated to looking at 1 million or more different tweets, and they were suggesting that Twitter was being used by bot farmers or by whoever to sway opinion in the public's mind or in the Twitter user's mind about who's good and who's bad. Somehow their same analytical approach, these people from QUT in Queensland, Australia, somehow they came to the conclusion that the politics subreddit isn't being manipulated in the same way. I wanted to find out because it's not just those QUT researchers, there's lots of people trying to look at what percentage of the social media that we use is bot activity. So I found a different study. This one's from last year, July 2024, called Unmasking Social Bots. How confident are we? And I couldn't help but notice, now this is on semanticscholar.org, that immediately underneath the title and the authors, it says TLDR. So where in the past you might have expected an abstract, now it says TLDR.
Yeah, fine. So what?
Maybe I've become a boomer already. It feels like the world is changing so quickly. I'm becoming one of those old curmudgeons at 37 years old. It's crazy. But it got me thinking, where does TLDR even come from? And apparently, according to the people who've tried to find out where did TLDR come from, it came from the early 2000s. So when I was in my mid-teens is when TLDR became a thing.
Yeah.
I found this interesting discussion on the theory of Reddit subreddit, where they were talking about how is it that in academic papers they put the abstract at the beginning, but on posts on Reddit or on different forums, you basically put the abstract at the end. The TLDR goes at the end, but in a paper the abstract goes at the beginning, which to me is an interesting question. Apparently, though, in modern academia, it's been solved. They've just changed the name of the abstract to TLDR. I'm not saying this is a good thing or a bad thing. I just found that interesting. That's all. Anyway, so I went and read through their study, and it's very interesting, but it's heavily loaded with advanced mathematics. It's a Bayesian approach to trying to analyze these tweets or these posts. How can you determine if it's a bot?
So many bots, bro. They just become bots.
Now, this is a serious and important question. How can you, if you're simply an observer of a tweet or a Reddit post or a forum post, whatever, how can a person, even a researcher, even a trained data scientist, how can you determine, without being able to know for certain, if it's a bot that wrote and posted that thing or if it's a human?
Was that a real question or was that soundboard?
This question is more meta than it might seem at first glance. Think about this. When you engage with social media, Twitter, Reddit, Instagram, Facebook, whatever, even the comments on YouTube. When you engage with this stuff, you might read something and think, yeah, that looks like a bot to me. That looks like it was written by AI. But how can you know? And so they take this Bayesian approach in this particular paper where they're like, well, you can't know, but how can we assign different probabilities and blah, 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 blah. Now they posted something within their paper. They included a post or a tweet by Elon Musk that we'll come to in a moment.
This is the last chance, man.
Now, in their TLDR, which in their paper is still called an abstract, and it's also repeated in their conclusion, they write that despite the progress made in developing multiple sophisticated social bot detection algorithms and tools, bot detection remains a challenging, unsolved problem that is fraught with uncertainty due to the heterogeneity of bot behaviors, training data, and detection algorithms.
Okay, so what's your point?
Now, this paper had a number of authors, including data scientists, nerds, and I mean that in a respectful way. Like, to me, data science, to study that, statistics and all that kind of thing, I think that's awesome. Like, that's a really cool thing to dedicate yourself to. These people are highly trained in it. And even they're saying that they can't really tell if a post is by a bot or by a human. Even they can't tell. The best they can come up with, basically, is a model that assigns different weights to different key terms and other elements of the data as it's coming in on a broader scale. And then they basically recommend like a triage where if you reach a certain confidence level, you assume it's a bot and then try to remove it from a platform. But at lower levels of confidence, even if it looks like it might be a bot, you shouldn't get rid of it from a platform because it could actually be a human. Now, I know this sounds a little bit complicated or convoluted, but one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about this is because if you take a step back and think about it, your average human has a tendency to repeat, to parrot what it's heard, whether they've heard it from the television or from their own social media or some guy down at the bar. Someone has said something to this person and then they go and repeat it.
The average person is a headline reader and a rumor spreader.
We see this even in our corner of the internet. We see it far too much for my liking, where people will repeat the dumbest shit like bots, like parrots, but they're not bots, at least not in the conventional sense in this context. And so if that person then gets onto Twitter or to Instagram or Facebook, whatever, and then parrots what they've heard or what they've read on the very same social media platforms, how could any third-party approach determine that that was a human or a bot? What I'm getting at here is, with the humans behaving like bots, how can you tell if a post was by a human acting like a bot or by a literal bot?
So many bots, bro. Like, sometimes I move through life and I feel like, look, we are all born like as players in this game, but everyone gets kind of programmed through schooling or whatever, education system, society, and then they just become bots.
And so at the risk of making too fine a point of it this early in the presentation, if you're somebody who does use Twitter or Reddit or Facebook, or you're in different Discords or Telegram groups or what have you, there's a very good chance that you are having certain ideas repeated to you over and over and over again, possibly with different wording or phraseology, but the same basic idea. For example, all pro sports are rigged, or Angelina Jolie is a man.
Mystery is a psyop. He's a psyop.
Or water can't stick to a ball.
These idiots in our truth community.
And these ideas might make a lot of sense to you, or you think they do. You might not realize that you've read or heard that idea dozens, hundreds, thousands of times to the point where it starts to make sense in your head, but not because you've really thought through it or found the evidence to support it, but because it's become a truth within your own mind. And this could very well be happening to me. So what I've been doing lately is thinking to myself, what are the ideas that I keep hearing repeated by people on social media or on YouTube videos or in podcasts? What are the ideas that keep getting repeated to me, and how much time have I really spent thinking through them for myself? And at what point does it even matter if what I'm reading or hearing is from a literal bot, or it's from a human who has been swayed by a bot, or it's from a human who is behaving like a bot? And this is without even getting into the spooky stuff about what this place really is and who these people really are. Now, I mentioned how in that paper where they were trying to develop a Bayesian mathematical approach to assigning weights to try and determine which posts and tweets are bots, they embedded a tweet from Elon Musk. So I went and found that tweet for myself, and it's still there on Elon Musk's account. Here's what he wrote in March of 2023. So we're talking about 2 years ago now. He writes, given that modern AI can solve any prove you're not a bot tests, it's now trivial to spin up 100,000 human-like bots for less than a penny per account. Paid verification increases bot cost by roughly 10,000% and makes it much easier to identify bots by phone and CC clustering. Obvious conclusion, paid account social media will be the only social media that matters. So what he is saying is that because AI is so good, and this was 2 years ago he wrote this, because AI has gotten so good, then any platform you're using where accounts can be created for free or can exist there for free will be swamped by the AI, by the bots, and they won't be able to be detected, or at least not easily enough to stop it.
Stop it.
That's not just Elon Musk's opinion. As I showed you earlier, even the data scientists themselves who've dedicated themselves to trying to research how can we come up with a method for detecting bots, they openly admit they can't actually do it. The best they can do is come up with models to assign probabilities and then recommend certain thresholds above and below which you treat different accounts or tweets as being bots. So whether you like Elon Musk or you don't, whether you trust him or you don't, whether you like academia or you don't, whether you like or trust science and the broader academic establishment, regardless of any of that, the official story is we can't actually tell the difference between the bots and the humans.
So many bots, bro. They just become bots.
We don't have to trust Elon Musk or the academics. We can just think about it for ourselves. Are you certain you can tell the difference between bots and humans if you're just reading comments on the internet?
Was that a real question or was that soundboard?
Sometimes it's obvious. You'll see what is clearly spam. For example, I watched a video recently where I went and checked the comments, and in the comments there were 3 consecutive comments from different accounts that were all promoting the same book. It wasn't a book by the guy, like the book wasn't connected to the video. Someone has just got a bot to go to different videos and say, oh, well, I didn't understand something. Then I read this book by this guy. And then the next account was saying something about how, well, the world didn't make sense to me. But then I was fortunate. So it was slightly reworded in different ways, but that's clearly bot behavior. So sometimes it's very obvious, but a lot of the time it isn't. Now, why does this matter? A number of reasons. One of them is because we're spending on average 5 hours per day on our smartphones. And a huge proportion of that is scrolling through stuff. Twitter, TikTok, you name it.
That's true.
Now, TikTok is video based, so the AI tech isn't as advanced there as it is with Twitter, to be fair. But how much time are you spending either on Twitter, Reddit, Facebook comments, different forums, these kinds of things? I don't know. That's for you to think of for yourself. But for me, I'm spending a lot of time reading stuff. And I'm guessing most of the people who watch this video or listen to this presentation, you're in the same boat. You're reading a lot of stuff.
That's right.
Now, if the idea of the algorithms is to give you content that you're going to engage with, and if the AI and the bot technology is so good that even the experts admit they can't even tell anymore, and if you know that if you're being honest, a lot of the time you wouldn't be able to tell either, then how would you know how much of what you're reading, what's going into your mind, is from another human or is from a bot?
I agree completely with you. 100%.
And if it's possible for AI to instantly, in a split second, create stuff, then why wouldn't it be able to do that as you're scrolling on your smartphone?
Any predictions for the future?
Unless you know the people who are behind the accounts, then you wouldn't be able to know. And unless you're checking each post as it comes in to verify, is this from a real human? Clicking on their account, reading other things they've read, seeing if they've got other material to try and verify, which no one's doing that. Unless you're doing that, how would you know if you're not already being served up instantaneously created content just for you that no one else will actually see because every person's feed is already being curated for them? So maybe you're following Kyrie Irving, or you're following Arnold Schwarzenegger, or you're following some celebrity and you'll see one of their tweets or one of their posts in your feed, okay, you can fairly infer that other people are going to see that same tweet if they're subscribed or following that person. Okay. But what about all of the other accounts and all of the other posts that turn up in the so-called For You section? What I'm suggesting is that either it's already happening or it's only a matter of time until it does happen. People will be getting these tweets coming up in their feeds or whatever platform they're on, and those posts or tweets will have been created in the moment just for the person looking at the screen. So we're not talking about bot farms trying to sway lots of people on Reddit or Facebook or Twitter. We're not even necessarily just talking about the so-called algorithms that want to give you content to keep you engaged. We're talking about this thing, this technology, this so-called AI creating stuff for you in real time, on the fly, based on what it knows about you. And so in this sense, I'm not talking about Chinese bot farms or Russian bot farms or left or right Republican Democrat. I'm not even talking about deep state. I'm not talking about Elon Musk. I'm not talking about any people out there trying to sway a whole group of people at the same time. I'm talking about the AI simply feeding back to you what it thinks you want to see. And what is it basing that on? What you're paying attention to and what you've written or said yourself. And so in this sense, what I'm talking about is the AI as a somewhat separate entity from any other political agendas that are out there, even potentially other social agendas that are out there. I'm talking about separate from that. I'm talking about the device in your hand talking to you and giving you what it thinks you want based on what it knows about you.
We traced the call. It's coming from inside the house. Do you hear me? It's coming from inside the house.
What if the nonsense that I might be consuming and you might be consuming in our feeds isn't coming from some overarching agenda to persuade me or you to believe anything? It's not from some attempt to persuade millions of people to vote a certain way. It's not coming from some agenda to persuade hundreds or even tens of thousands of people to think a certain way. It's not even to push hundreds or dozens of people towards some mindset. It is the so-called AI having a one-to-one interaction with you and with me and potentially spinning us as individuals into goddamn la-la land.
These idiots in our truth community.
We've looked at 2 studies so far. The first one was showing how there was this huge increase in activity on Twitter during one of these debates and one of these Tucker Carlson things that happened a couple of years ago. And when they tried to apply their same methodology to Reddit politics, they determined that it wasn't being bot farmed. And they suggested, as I showed you on the screen, as I read out to you verbatim for the listeners, that the reasons for this were because of the large group of moderators, the extensive rules of the subreddit, and the auto mod. Let me read to you some of the top posts on our politics right now as I sit here. Mitch McConnell falls down Senate stairs. Texas Democrat to bring first articles of impeachment of Trump second term. House Republicans melt down as Democrats try to subpoena Elon Musk. Americans said they want new voices. Democrats aren't listening. Congressional office says Trump has no authority to dismantle US aid. This is so much worse than last time. Thousands mass at Treasury Department to demand end to Musk coup. GOP quashes oversight Democrats' effort to subpoena Elon Musk. Make of that what you will. Elon Musk took over Twitter. The story was that he fired 80% of the staff. And there was a video of some of the staff leaving the office, the fired employees with their cardboard boxes and their personal effects. And this is what happened.
Do you know how many?
I don't know. I know my...
Nobody knows anything. How did they tell you?
My director was...
I'm really sorry, by the way. I realized.
I went on Tesla, man.
Right. Yeah, me too. Was it your entire team or just individuals?
So some people are in the Zoom meeting.
We worry about
the future of celebrity conservatorships? Like, would Free Britney happen?
Michelle Obama wouldn't have happened.
And Elon Musk Twitter? I don't
Elon
know,
Musk
right? This used to be a
Twitter.
town square.
You know, Obama in
and
2008 wouldn't have happened.
Who laid you off?
Without
my
like,
director, our
Elon
entire
Musk
team got laid off.
You need
data engineering.
free speech is when
These guys were pranksters who weren't employed at Twitter at any time, just pretended to be ex-employees, and they were saying things about how they were worried what their wife's boyfriend was going to say about it. Oh, how we laugh.
That's true.
What we didn't know at the time is that Elon Musk would go on to be as apparently influential as he is in the so-called Trump administration. We don't have time to go into this now, but there appears to be overt connections between people like Peter Thiel, Elon Musk, J.D. Vance, and of course Donald Trump. And if the average person is spending 5 hours a day on their smartphones, if that is how much time and energy they're spending on these devices, then the people who control the platforms, it would stand to reason, have a lot of power over the world as we know it right now. I'm not telling you anything you don't already know.
Okay, so what's your point?
The central point I was trying to make earlier, though, was that if even the experts can't determine what is or isn't a bot, then what chance do you or I have? And if we accept that we can't tell if what we're reading is from a bot or otherwise, and we're getting all of these ideas repeated into our head over and over again, and if it's possible that some of those posts or tweets could be made instantaneously just for us, and we're not checking to see where that tweet really came from, then how would we know if we're not already in an echo chamber of one? And what leads people to spend 5 hours a day on their phones in the first place? Well, on that recent Late Night Truth Lounge, which I'll link to in the show notes below, which originally I was just meant to be making a promo for that, I mentioned this book, Bowling Alone, by Robert Putnam. It was published in 2000. It was originally a much shorter article that he published in a journal in 1995. So I went and read that paper. Again, this is a paper from 1995. One of the things he wrote about was how people were spending much less time with their neighbors or with their friends or what have you. This breakdown of what we call, or what he calls, or what some people call social capital. When I went and read this paper earlier today, or early this evening, here's one of the things that stood out to me. He wrote, a second aspect of informal social capital on which we happen to have reasonably reliable time series data involves neighborliness. In each general social survey since 1974, respondents have been asked, how often do you spend a social evening with a neighbor? The proportion of Americans who socialize with their neighbors more than once a year has slowly but steadily declined over the last 2 decades, from 72% in 1974 to 61% in 1993. Now, I just want you to think about this for a moment. How often do you spend a social evening with a neighbor?
Are you seriously asking that question to me?
Yes, you. I'm talking to the person who's either watching this video or listening to this audio. How often do you spend a social evening with a neighbor?
Good question, actually. Good question.
In my case, the people who live in the same building as me, this is a 6-story apartment complex, I have never spent a single evening at a party or a get-together with any of my neighbors here. Not a single evening in 3 years. But you could argue my circumstances are a little bit unusual given that I'm living in Plovdiv, Bulgaria, for bizarre reasons that go back to 2020 and beyond. But in your case, whoever you are, wherever you live, how often do you spend an evening at a party, a barbecue, a get-together, a dinner night, whatever, with one of your neighbors? How often? In 1995, Robert Putnam, who wrote Bowling Alone, was talking about how in the 20 years leading up to when he wrote his paper, so from the mid-70s to the mid-1990s, the proportion of people who do that more than once a year had dropped from 72% to 61%. So this was apparently a big deal to him. From the 70s to the 90s, it had dropped from roughly 70% to 60% of people could say that they spend a social evening with a neighbor more than once a year. What are the numbers today, all these years later? Well, according to this Pew Research piece that was published in 2019, so that's already 6 years ago, This study, by the way, or this survey was based on a sample size of over 6,000 people, which if you've studied statistics, you'll know that when you get to those kinds of numbers, that's a pretty good sample size. And so long as it was a representative sample, you can extrapolate from that with a fair degree of accuracy across the broader population. So from this survey, they found, and they did the survey in 2018, and this was published in 2019, they found that among Americans who know at least some of their neighbors, a majority, 58%, say they never meet them for parties or get-togethers. That's among the Americans who say they know their neighbors. In the same study, a lot of the respondents said they didn't even know their neighbors. Almost 1 in 6 said they didn't know any of their neighbors. So among those who did, among the roughly 5 in 6 of people who know at least some, 58% of those people said they never met them ever for parties or anything. Which is to say that by 2018, 2/3 of Americans, according to this study, never spent time with their neighbors. So compare that again to Bowling Alone by Robert Putnam, which was based on the change from the 70s to the 90s. From the 70s to the 90s, according to the research he had done, the proportion of Americans who socialized with their neighbors more than once a year had dropped from 72% to 61%. That's more than once a year, was still at 61% in 1993, but that drop was one of a number of things that Putnam thought was important enough to write a paper and then a book about, a very influential book at the time. So compare 61% of people saying they hang out with their neighbors more than once a year. That was in the mid-1990s, which apparently was a big problem. Well, by 2019, more than 60% of people never hung out with their neighbors. Now, why am I talking about all of this? So there's an idea that as humans, there is our psychology as individuals, and then there is crowd psychology, which is more to do with how our minds work when we're in a group. And so the idea is that you can take the individual and they have certain thinking patterns and behaviors and values and mindsets and all these kinds of things. The same person, when placed within a group context, can have different values and thinking patterns and what have you. And this can be studied, and it has been studied for more than 100 years now. It's called crowd psychology. Well, one of the powers of social media, be it Reddit or Twitter or Facebook or any of these things, is that we can feel like we're in a crowd because we feel like we're reading the thoughts and the opinions of people who other people are reading as well. It's like we're in this big collective. So even if every tweet was from a real person and every Reddit comment and post was from a real person, this would be a very powerful force, quite obviously. It would be very easy for us, even if we think we're intelligent, to be persuaded by whatever seems to be the popular opinions or ideas on these media platforms. Now, what happens if instead our social media feeds are not from other humans out there with ideas or opinions? They're not even necessarily from bot farms. They're from the AI taking what we have said or what it thinks we're going to engage with and giving it back to us. Suddenly, the crowd psychology effect will apply to us, even though we're not actually in a crowd, not even a fake crowd, but instead what appears to be a crowd because the AI is giving back to us what it thinks we want to see. So imagine a person has a set of ideas or beliefs on some particular topic, and they go onto their social media feeds and they're scrolling through the stuff, and the AI is creating for them instantaneously a bunch of posts that seem real, but they're really just mirroring what they think that what the AI is giving to that individual. That individual become empowered psychologically, whether they realize it or not, because they'll feel like they're in a crowd. But it isn't a crowd. It's just dozens or hundreds or maybe even thousands of recreations of what the AI thinks this person wants to see. Can you see the point I'm getting at here now? My grandpappy Gustave Le Bon wrote, "A crowd scarcely distinguishes between the subjective and the objective. It accepts as real the images evoked in its mind, though they most often have only a very distant relation with the observed facts." That's what he wrote in The Crowd, 1895. And it's not a very long book, it's like 100 pages, and that particular quote's from chapter 2, relatively early in the book. What he was writing about is how the individual can be thoughtful, inquisitive, curious. They can have a set of values. Put them in a crowd and they're a very different creature. What I'm trying to suggest here is that someone can sit on their phone and they don't have to be getting influenced by bots or even by Elon Musk's agenda. All it would take is for the AI to be feeding them instantly generated content that it thinks they want to see, and suddenly they'll be in a crowd, but that crowd will just be an echo chamber of one. Can you think through the consequences of this? Now, how do you know that's not already happening to you? And how do I know that's not already happening to me? And even if it's not already happening, how will we know if this is what starts to happen? Think about it. Seriously. How do you or I know that we're not already in echo chambers of one? And even if we're not in that right now, if it was to start on Twitter or Reddit or anywhere tomorrow, how would you or I know? You might think there's lots of people out there on the internet who agree with you or have similar opinions or viewpoints or values to you. You might think that. Insofar as you're engaging with content on your phone and on social media, how do you know you're not already just hearing back what you've already said, reading text based on what you already think? How do you know you're not already far more alone than you could have ever imagined?
Are you seriously asking that question to me?
Good question, actually. Good question.
Was that a real question or was that soundboard?
I want to read to you just a short section from a separate paper about ultrasound safety. This one's called Ultrasound Biosafety Considerations for the Practicing Sonographer and Sonologist. This is from 2018. It's from the Departments of Radiology and Bioengineering at the University of California, San Diego, in conjunction with a bunch of different other institutions, universities, you name it. It was published in 2009 by the American Institute of Ultrasound in Medicine. Again, this is from 2009. I just want to read to you a couple of sections. Now, this is a paper that basically concludes that ultrasound for the baby, while it's in the womb, is safe enough so long as it is medically indicated. But this paper is saying, so long as it's medically indicated and they follow prudent practice and all these general vagaries, it's probably safe enough. So this paper isn't trying to say that ultrasound is not a good idea. It's not saying that. But if you read the full paper, here's what it does say. It is also important to minimize eye exposures in the fetus and adult because of the relatively low perfusion in the eye, particularly in the lens, which has a reduced capability for heat dissipation. Furthermore, because ultrasound is mechanical energy, the mechanical interaction of sound with cells and tissues has the potential to produce non-thermal bioeffects. Limited information is available regarding possible subtle biological effects at diagnostic levels in fetal, pediatric, and adult patients. Limited information is available regarding possible subtle biological effects at diagnostic levels in fetal, pediatric, and adult patients. Now, why would there be limited information available? It also says this. In 1976, the US Food and Drug Administration began regulating medical devices, including ultrasound, and eventually developed 4 application-specific exposure limits. This regulatory output was established on the basis of the predicate devices in use in the market at that time and the apparent safety of ultrasound as understood at that time. In 1992, at the request of manufacturers and end users interested in obtaining specific improvements in the diagnostic capabilities of ultrasound, the FDA changed this limit to 720 milliwatts per centimeter squared for all applications except eye scanning. Now hold on one darn tootin' second. So in 1976, they were saying that for fetal and other ultrasounds, the limit was 94. That was 1976. The limit was 94 milliwatts per centimeter squared. So it was 94 milliwatts in 1976 for babies in the womb. But then in 1992, it changed to 720 milliwatts per centimeter squared. That's an increase of over 7 times. 1976 for fetal and other, 94 milliwatts. 1992, they changed it to 720 milliwatts. Here's what it says next. Most prenatal epidemiologic studies on bioeffects have been based on ultrasound exposures occurring before 1992, with equipment regulated according to the pre-1992 output limits of 94 milliwatts per centimeter squared. Are you guys hearing what I'm saying to you? According to their own papers, where they're trying to say that this stuff is safe enough if used the right way, they're admitting that most of the so-called studies that have been done on this were based on when the regulations stipulated that the power output was 1/6 of what the limits then went to. Does this seem familiar to anybody? Now, even if that was all you knew about this, hopefully you can see a potential issue here.
Yeah, that's true.
If you look into this further, you'll find that some of the more modern technology has even greater power outputs. But hopefully you can see the issue that if, by their own testimony, most of the so-called safety studies were done on pre-1992 technology, which were mandated to have much slower power outputs, you can see the potential issue here.
Yeah.
Now, you might recall that we looked in this same study at how it said that it's particularly important to be careful of the baby's eyes, the developing baby's eyes, because they are so delicate. When people show you ultrasounds of their babies, is the other eyes not there? Is the head not there? From what you've seen, from the people whose ultrasounds you've seen, or maybe from even the ultrasounds of your babies, did they seem like they were taking care not to ultrasound the baby's eyes?
Good question, actually. Good question.
Well, I don't know if you know this, but apparently there's a global trend. This comes to us from ctvnews.ca. It appears to be a global trend. A review of more than 275 studies from around the world concluded more than 1/3 of children and teens have myopia, or nearsightedness, which is 3 times higher than 1990.
This is really weird, okay?
This comes to us from The Atlantic. In the US, 42% of 12 to 54-year-olds were nearsighted in the early 2000s, the last time a national survey of myopia was conducted, up from a quarter in the 1970s. Though more recent large-scale surveys are not available, when I asked, this is the author, when I asked eye doctors around the US if they were seeing more nearsighted kids, the answers were absolutely.
Oh, absolutely.
No question about it. Now, this particular article goes on to suggest that this has a lot to do with kids and screens, particularly smartphones and tablets. And that makes sense to me as a potential explanation for why so many kids seem to be getting diagnosed with myopia and requiring glasses. Is it also possible that the ultrasound might have something to do with this? Now, you might think, hold on, JLB, that was quite a pivot there. You're talking about the bots, the AI, the studies by the data scientists trying to determine what is and isn't a bot, Elon Musk, Peter Thiel. You're talking about all this stuff, and then suddenly you pivot to the ultrasound. Why would you do that?
Good question.
Well, ultrasound is a good example of a topic where I know I'm not in an echo chamber of other people telling me what to believe, because even in this corner of the internet, I don't hear anybody talking about this stuff. In fact, if they do talk about it, and there's a couple of people in particular, people who I respect and consider to be some of the most intelligent people in this entire corner of the internet, I've heard them at various times on their own platforms talk about JLB and his wild theories about ultrasound and the potential harms it might be causing. Both of these individuals, who, like I said, I respect highly, seems to suggest or imply that I'm way off base here.
We're in a lot of trouble!
On my own Discord server, there is no ultrasound channel. And on the other channels, nobody's talking about ultrasounds. I seem to be the only person in this corner of the internet who ever does talk about this stuff.
JLB would post some things that was like, yeah, like that's the only other person I've seen who's bringing these things up or questioning this or questioning that, isn't afraid to question some of the basic fabrics of our assumptions of what reality even is.
100% correct. 100% correct.
That's a fair assessment, I think.
I've tried to talk about this on Reddit, and my threads tend to get downvoted to oblivion.
Yeah, that's true.
But if I ever wake up one day and my social media feeds suddenly do have lots of people talking about ultrasounds and the problems they might be causing, then I'll know that it's possible that the AI is simply feeding me what it thinks I want to hear. Now, the reason I'm telling you this is because I'm trying to share with you how I'm trying to think about how would I know if I'm in an echo chamber? How would you know if you're in an echo chamber? What I try to do is to base my opinions on available evidence. I look at the different studies, I study their methodology, I see if they make sense. I look around at what I see in the real world anecdotally, and where I can find different pieces of evidence that overlap what I see in the real world and different theories about it or studies about it, generally I'll think that there's something there. Do you think that people are getting stupider? And if so, what's your explanation for it? Do you think that more children are being diagnosed with myopia and being prescribed glasses? And if so, what's your explanation for it? Have you read any scientific studies about the supposed safety or otherwise of so-called ultrasound? These are questions for you to think about for yourself. If you're a member of johnlebon.com, I recommend you check out this link to Utopia Reflections, which I wrote a few years ago. If you're not a member of johnlebon.com, I recommend you check out the latest Late Night Truth Lounge, which is available for free. It's almost 4 hours of content. The audience had a lot of fun. The trivia was hotly contested. I took the time to take this file and then split it into two. Balance the audio, re-render, upload for your listening pleasure.
You did a fantastic job with it. It's not easy to do. I admire you. I think you did wonderful.
In fact, people were so happy with the presentation last night that 5 different people bought me a coffee. One of those dudes, Thirst for Truth, bought me 5 coffees to say thanks for that content.
Bloody hell.
If you think presentations like the video you've just watched or the audio you've just listened to is useful or valuable in any way, all I ask is that you leave a comment in the comment section below, or you email me at johnlebon123@gmail.com to let me know what you make of all of this. That's all I'm asking for. But at the same time, if you would like to buy me a coffee or a frothy, there is now a buy me a coffee section on the support page of johnlebon.com.
Just fucking do it.
Tonight I've covered bots and AI, phone addiction 5 hours a day. Have you checked your phone lately to see how much time you're spending on it? Echo chambers, and this potential for an echo chamber of one. Ultrasound and health. So leave your comments in the comment section below. Send me an email, johnlebon123@gmail.com. Check the links in the show notes. I'll link to all of the studies and the papers and the different things we've looked at in this presentation. And if, like Thirst for Truth, you think this kind of content is valuable, then consider buying me a coffee. The link to that is in the show notes as well below. Okay, everybody, goodbye. Have a lovely day. Ciao, ciao.
Sure, I get it. Okay, so what's your point?
Are you seriously asking that question to me?
Was that a real question or was that soundboard?
Good question, actually. Good question.
We're in a lot of trouble!
Yeah, that's true.
JLB would post some things that was like, yeah, like that's the only other person I've seen who's bringing these things up or questioning this or questioning that, isn't afraid to question some of the basic fabrics of our assumptions of what reality even is.
100% correct. 100% correct.
That's right.
You did a fantastic job with it. It's not easy to do. I admire you. I think you did wonderful.
Yeah.
Are you a fan of JLB? Because we usually don't allow compliments for JLB on this show.
This is really weird, okay?